Hey kids, I'm going to expose a very major cultural political point that most definitely your parents and the Browning teachers don't understand. Because if they understood this, they wouldn't champion the current Democrats and the left. They don't understand the following. Politics is downstream of culture, okay? Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat should represent your understanding of what cultures you champion and why. Okay? If you are on the political right, you champion things such as wisdom, logic, and truth, and also natural law. And then you use wisdom, which is studying history, seeing what has happened throughout history, and then appreciating the knowledge gleaned from that and cultivating it into your present society. And also realizing that when people want to take ideas and go nutty off in a direction, you say, hold on a second. We should look at what happened in these other situations because millions of people died, poverty, famine, billions of money lost, angry, tension, all these things. And you look at history and you say, no, we tried that. That's wisdom. And we use logic. And we say, okay, even though there's these two children crying, if we stop the two children crying, there's going to be seven children crying. So maybe we need to let these two children cry so we don't make seven children cry. That's logic, okay? And a courage to stare truth in the face, no matter how difficult it is, and acknowledge it, accept it, and do what we can with that real truth. None of those three things represents the left. The left is ideological. They're emotional. They believe in the utopia. Their utopia, their mind's eye vision of what they think society can be like is best described in John Lennon's song Imagine. Imagine there's no borders, imagine there's no countries, imagine there's no religion, imagine there's no possessions, we'll all live for the day and the world will be as one. They believe that is possible. And the right knows that is not possible because the right looks at nature, the jungle, and sees how the tigers are acting, and the antelope are acting, and the squirrels are acting, and the ants are acting, and the trees are acting, and shedding their canopy and destroying other trees. And it is not realistic at all to expect everything to just live as one. As a matter of fact, there'd be starvation and overcrowding and a lack of life satisfaction because you couldn't strive, you'd have nothing to do all day. Everything about it is artificial and sick and nothing works out. So, if you understand that, now you can look at the globe and see what countries are adopting what type of government, how right-wing they are, how left-wing they are. Now, I'm getting to my point. While the Union of Soviet Social Republic was a reality, the Soviet Union, they were the dominant communist entity that was trying to swallow up the entire world, literally, the USSR, which was in Russia, okay? And of course, America was the dominant right-wing capitalistic society that's diametrically opposite as Russia. And during the Cold War, from the 1950s through 1990, the reason there was so much hostility between us is because it is correct and natural to have hostility between the USA and the USSR. That's supposed to be that way because they're diametrically opposite. One's saying A is right, the other one's saying non-A is right. And then they tried to prove their ideologies in many different ways. As a nice specific example, Russia thought that if they pumped a lot of money into the chess program, they can prove our ideology is superior. We produce the best mind. It's interesting, right? What happened was, because communism is so bad, and even though they tried to hide it, eventually in the mid-1950s, the Khrushchev report came out revealing the actual horrible conditions in Russia, the thought police, the famine, the secret police, the repression of free speech, the lack of technology, everything about Russia, just absolutely horrible. And then eventually they ran out of money because communism is an utter failure every single way you look at it. Now, we're getting to the meat of this talk. United States was capitalist, right-wing, small government, free market, individual inalienable rights. Communism was collective rights, destroy the individual, no freedom of thought, no freedom of speech, everything for the greater good in central planning. Government owns everything because the people theoretically own the government idea, communism, socialism, progressivism. Now, during all that time, from 1950 through 1990, the USSR was pumping into the United States communist subversion, as can be well documented in facts and through former USSR spies telling us what they were doing. They were pumping subversion into us in the form of massive propaganda.
When I was working for Novosti Press, we would snow plow editorial offices, student organizations, religious groups with literature of class struggle, if not directly Marxism-Leninism propaganda, then a propaganda of illegitimate aspirations of working class, betterment of life, equality, equality.
Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy.
In the form of massive propaganda to destroy our pillars, meaning anything that was holding up our society, such as the concept of the nuclear family, the wife, the husband, and the children, and the traditional family roles. The father makes the money traditionally, not always. The mother nurtures. And as a bit of a drill down there, that has a lot of organic wisdom because over the hundreds of millennium, we have organically grown that way. We're not asexual. There's a reason why men have body armor and we're aggressive and we're dominant and we're logical. And women are feminine and supple and tender and nurturing. And they have a thicker layer of fat biologically, and they have childbearing hips and they don't have as much muscle. Nature has demanded this of us to survive. Thus, in the traditional family, and a healthy man, he is dominant and all the other qualities. Opposite of a female, and that makes great sex, great sexual chemistry. That's the family unit. And then there's other things like religion. Whether you believe it or not is not my point. Religion gels the community. We all believe in the same flavor of God, okay? Western people believe in Christianity. We made it. Far Eastern people believe in things like Taoism, Buddhism, things like that. Their DNA made that. That's how they see the world. The people in the Middle East, in the Arabian Peninsula, made Islam. A very stern, intense religion with very strict laws. That's how their DNA and their culture sees reality. That's why religion is a pillar of your society. And it goes on and on and on. Your type of music matters. Your traditions. You don't think it matters, but it actually does. You just don't realize it. 4th of July, Christmas, Easter. The last 2 are religious. See that? It's the Super Bowl, the World Series, what used to be the Academy Awards before they got destroyed. That's another one, public awards. Our 5-day work week, or 6 if you struggle a bit, but 5 days, you take Sunday off, cultural origin there, the day of rest, Sunday. Our pillar of rugged individualism. We love expression, we love independence, we love freedom. We love that in America. That is why all of us initially, well, before the last 30 years, which is my point, you came here, you didn't ask for handouts, you were like, I'm going to make it myself, I'm going to make my claim, and I'm going to be clever and believe in myself and make something of myself. And then we had the 13 colonies, and then we expanded west, and we had Lewis and Clark and Davy Crockett and such exploring out west, and you never knew if you were going to live or die from day to day, but people did, and you were an individual, and it was a wonderful feeling. You can hear the music of classical composer Aaron Copland. You can hear it. He articulated it through music, that feeling of American individualism, hope, uncompromising passion. That is the characteristic of our people, although it used to be. We have our language, which we hear all the time, and we don't realize it, but it's always vibrating into us. And we grow, that helps us grow in a certain way, and it's from actually our DNA, our European DNA. Our code of law, as well as our government. We have been established as a republic, not a democracy, a democratic republic in which the collective does not decide everything, the rule of law does. So if you say eating sheep is bad because you have 8 sheep and you have 2 wolves, well, if the wolves suddenly say there's 6 wolves and 4 sheep, they're not allowed to say today eating sheep is good. No, because the law, not the collective, the law says eating sheep is bad. We believe in this. This is a republic. Trial by jury. And then you have the Bill of Rights. Individual, inalienable rights. And of course, we have freedom of speech. Freedom of the press. Freedom of the press is so deeply abused. It's not my point. We believe in freedom. Now, from 1950 to 1990, the communists were pumping into our culture subversion to destroy every one of these pillars. I can talk about this for a solid 10 hours, so I have to think about how to keep this short. Through cultural Marxism, communism is Marxism, but they change it to the culture. You can see my other videos. They sought consciously, strategically, to destroy these pillars, such as the family unit. How do we break apart the family unit? We argue that gender is a societal construct. The females and the males are the same. They argue that the husband is actually stupid, and we're going to portray the husband as stupid in cartoons so people lose respect for them. We're going to say the police are mean people and they need to be looked down upon, so you don't respect the police. Oh, they're pigs. We have an awful picture now in our Capitol buildings of pigs dressed as policemen. It's just awful. And promoted is to look at police and the military, of course, as evil, terrible people. And you see that represented in all these movies. And you have the criminal represented as a victim. This guy, he's a drug dealer. He takes the easy road, makes people die of his drugs, but he's cool because he's badass and he can get women. He really was repressed all the time if his skin was black. And they keep pumping this. That's subversion. They're subverting all our pillars. You can easily see Christianity. You see all these movies that get Academy Award. Movie Doubt. I don't know all the names, but you can research it yourself. There's always these movies about, the pedophilia issue in the church. Yes, there is an issue of pedophilia, and that's an issue. But actually, that doesn't have anything directly to do with Christianity, with the Bible. But the point is to destroy, to destroy, to destroy. And of course, national pride is maximally torn down by people like Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn, just wanting to say everywhere we go, whatever we do, they're going to look at the bad side of it. We go to Vietnam, it was terrible. We go to Iraq, it was terrible. We go do Syria, it was terrible. We do this, it's terrible. Nothing can ever be right for these people. We go stop communist takeovers and subversion in Central and South America, it's always terrible. They go so far as if there is a Marxist regime oppressing the people and then we go in there and clean it out, they'll twist it to no end. They'll say, we went in there and destroyed an innocent, happy people. There's nothing they won't do. They will spin, they're so brazen, the left. They will spin history that 2 + 2 = 19.7, and they're just, sky's the limit on how far they will say this. As you can see, perfect example of this, is a movie called, by Oliver Stone, the deep communist, It's called something like A Brief History of the United States or The Untold History of the United States. It's all lies. You can't find a fact in there. So my point is, by pumping in all this communism, oh, everyone's oppressed, we need liberation, and black people are oppressed, oppressed, oppressed. The fact is, black people in America are treated better than most anywhere in the world, including African countries, definitely including Haiti. That's why Haitians are drowning to try to get to America. Yet your teachers tell you, the commercials tell you, the movies tell you, the literature tells you that Browning's pumping into you that America is systematically racist against blacks, this tremendous history of oppression. It's a lie. It is a lie. And you can verify all this because the facts are right there, man. Look it up yourself. But you have to know not to look at the left-wing spin. And of course, this very well includes Wikipedia. Wikipedia is always changing everything they can because they're leftists. They're on the payroll twisting that stuff. But you look for yourself. Look at source documents.
I grew up under the Jim Crow laws. I grew up in Alabama. I worked in cotton fields and the plantations and things like that. And yeah, black men were a noble men for the most part. They got married. They bought land, they educated their families, they took care of themselves and others, and they were not running around blaming white folks. They got along with white Americans. Why didn't we see this issue when I was growing up as opposed to now when black people can do whatever they want? But you just
my
use
whole
the
life
same,
is pretty
you
much
use the
black.
same things that they use.
What do you
White
mean?
supremacy, which
True.
doesn't exist, racism, which doesn't exist. You're using the same words that most blacks are using, men and women are using for the excuse
I
of
don't
failure.
think the issue is that it doesn't exist. I think for
doesn't
some
exist.
reason in your own personal development, you can't see it or grasp it, but
Because
it exists.
it's not there. It's not there. Had it been there, blacks would not have done as well under the Jim Crow law. They did better under the Jim Crow law than they do now. It's so amazing to me that all these lies are made up why people are suffering, and especially black people. It's a lack of moral character, the destruction of the family, a turning away from God, values. If you don't have those things, all you have are a bunch of excuses. And it's time out for the excuses. It really is. They have gotten away with blaming white folks and blaming someone else that they're just rotten to the core with it now.
I'm not saying that there wasn't things that needed to be handled, such as there was definitely racism and KKK issues in the early 1900s, absolutely. And we thought that segregation would be the best situation, but it wasn't. So we corrected it. And there is racism because that's unfortunately natural when you have this sick multi-ethnic community that we promote. It's not healthy. It has nothing to do with love. It's not healthy. You don't take a pack of wolves and a pack of deer and a pack of chickens and a pack of frogs and say you must all live together in this space. You don't do it. It's not moral or immoral at all. It's nothing to do with morality. It's to do with nature. But once again, the left believes in a utopia. And that's why, because they have so gotten their way in the last 30 years, America's hell. Boy, I'm digressing a lot because there's a lot to say. This is my point. Oh, I'll get to my point. The USSR was the fruition of communism. They're communist. The USA was capitalist. The USSR fell in, I think, 1989. They fell because they were so sick of this failed communism. The people like you and me, these people in the USSR said, we got to get rid of it. And they revolted. And they got hold of the military, and the military agreed. And the USSR was no more. That hammer and sickle flag, that was eschewed. And then they had the Russian flag, which is something like white, red, blue, something like that. Okay, and now they're Russia. They're no longer USSR, they're Russia. They flipped. Now Russia is capitalistic. Russia is capitalistic, or is trying to be, all right? So this is my point. Those Russians who were oppressed by communism for so long, who were revolted by it, sickened by it, were so sick by it, they revolted and they're like, we got capitalism. Thank you. They all cheered in the streets. Never again will we go to communism. Never again, okay? Now, kids, I have a question for you. Who do you think appreciates capitalism more now, the Russians or the United States? Of course, the Russians appreciate it more because they just got over disgustingness of communism. Just like if you just had too much to drink and now you're hungover, you're like, man, I'm never drinking that much again. I'm so sick of it. But this other person who hasn't been hungover in a year is like, yeah, I'll get wasted with you, because he forgets how bad the hangover is. See? The Russians have the fresh experience of communism and they want no part of it. Now, even though Russia collapsed, their successful subversion of American right-wing capitalism and conservatism still exists. They have destroyed our country. Our country has been completely subverted by communism. So, right now, things have reversed since they were in the last 20 years. And no leftist understands this because they are both ignorant and stupid. Some combination of ignorance and stupid. You cannot be a leftist unless you are in some combination ignorant and stupid of what I've talked about here. Very important point, and I hope the teachers hear this point. I'm going to say it again. If you are today a leftist, that means that you are some combination of ignorant and stupid to the understanding of political thought and movements and reality and history needed to understand what makes our society and our globe the way it is. Right now, the USA is 50%, maybe more, some in there, communist. That's why we have all this sickness. Russia is capitalist. Now, they have other problems. They have a bit of a dictator, but it's still a capitalistic society. And Putin, while he is a quasi-dictator, he actually wants the best for his people. The Russians are lucky that way, and that's why they love him. He's not a Saddam Hussein. He's not killing the people. He's making the world good for his people. Now, they don't have much freedom of speech. They don't have much freedom of elections. But they are lucky enough that this tyrant is a well-meaning tyrant. That's what he is. This is my point. Fast forward to this Russian interference bullshit in 2016 with Trump and Hillary Clinton. The stupid left does not understand that Russia is not our ideological enemy. Russia, not USSR, Russia, the one with the blue, white, red flag, is our ideological ally. Ideological. If you have 5 people in a room and you love pitching in baseball, and he loves pitching in baseball, and this guy believes in hitting, and this guy believes in hitting, and this guy believes in the farm team or something, you are going to have an argument about how to make a team. The guy who believes in pitching like you, he's your natural ally in that argument. In the same way, Russia is the original United States natural ally right now. Yes, it has its own goals, but it's still its ideological ally. While Russia is heavily capitalistic now, the USA is in a battle, in a civil war between capitalism and communism. Things have reversed, haven't they? Yes, they have. They have. Russia's the capitalist and America's the communist. And, by the way, the same subversion has also happening in Europe. But the bigger problem is Europe was never hardcore capitalist anyway. So the communist ideas have always been flowing on over there. So Europe now is very largely communist. The EU, we call it the EU-SSR. They're basically communist. So then, look at how the things have turned. The USSR used to be communist, Europe used to be more or less capitalist, and America used to be hardcore capitalist. Now, the revolutions have happened because the pendulum keeps swinging, because people are too stupid to understand this stuff. Russia's capitalist, the EU is mostly communist, and the USA is in a civil war about it. Now, let's understand politics now. When you hear all these pundits screaming about Russian interference in the election, and they allude to the Cold War. The former USSR has conquered America finally. When you see them putting on hammer and sickle hats and laughing and saying, "Dos vidanya, Trump," these left-wingers have no idea what the hell they're talking about.
Biggest winner and biggest loser of 2016.
Biggest winner, Vladimir Putin. He did
Yeah.
it. He did it. He did what Gorbachev couldn't do. He did what Castro couldn't do. He basically took over the United States and got himself a Manchurian candidate. And that is something that no other Russian leader has been able to do. And he'll be cheering about this, and this will be in history books for the next 50 years.
No, it's amazing. Russia
amazing
emerging as the global hegemon after we defeated them in the Cold War is shocking.
Wait, I'm sorry. I forgot who won the election. Do svidania. Dobro požalovat Vilacho. Ja, Stephen Colbert.
See? They're so twisted up in their stupid, ignorant minds, they have no idea. They think that what happened was the modern USSR has infiltrated America and successfully got to Trump. That is diametrically opposite. To this day, no one has shown us evidence that Russia meddled in our elections. All we know about is IP addresses from Russia bought Facebook ads and such. That doesn't mean the Russian government did it. That means maybe the Russian government did it, but maybe the people did it. And even so, buying Facebook ads? As an aside, every country is doing that. You think America's not buying Israeli ads to push Netanyahu, and Israel's not buying Jordan ads, and France is not buying German Facebook, and everyone's doing political warfare? Everyone's doing that stuff. The fact is, if Russia interfered with us, which there's no evidence that they did, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. And my point's proven. It is true that Putin was happy that Trump won, as he should be. He should be happy that Trump won. You know why? Because Russia is an independent capitalistic state, and they want another independent capitalistic state thriving so that these two people with now the same ideology can get along. Case in point, let's look at NATO, which is a European alliance. NATO used to be the West's military arm of Europe and America battling the Warsaw Pact group, which was the communist arm. And then it was Warsaw versus NATO in Eastern Europe, all the big battle line. Well, guess what happened? Russia fell. There is no Warsaw Pact. There's no army there. There's the Russian army, but it's not ideologically the same at all. Yet we still have NATO. I have a question for you kids. What is the necessity of NATO presently? What is the necessity of NATO? There is no necessity for NATO. It should be disbanded. Why are we paying for an international force in Eastern Europe? Why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? Furthermore, you know what they're doing over in NATO? And you can look all this up. They're trying to have new Eastern European countries and Russian countries join NATO, such as Ukraine, such as Belarus, such as Lithuania, such as Turkey, such as Hungary, all those people over there. I have a question for you kids. Why is NATO doing that? And B, if you were Russia, capitalistic, innocent, autonomous country Russia, and you saw Europe, which is largely communist right now, the European Union, which is a Soviet model, central planning, no free speech, your vote basically means nothing. You saw these communists taking your allies and encroaching on your borders. How would you feel about that if you were Russia? Would you have a legitimate grievance to stop this? Of course you would. If we had the former Soviet Union start taking Mexico and making them Warsaw Pact, and Cuba Warsaw Pact, and making Canada Warsaw Pact, would we have a right to be disturbed by this? Of course we would. Thus, while Hillary Clinton, because she's so stupid, and all she wanted to do was be the first woman president, be the first woman president, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Look at her talk about issues. She doesn't understand.
I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who's currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of, sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far. And that's assuming Jill Stein will give it up, which she might not, because she's also a Russian asset.
She was going to start wars with Russia. No, we have to be strong with NATO and build up the front there, and we can't take Putin, just be strong. They're insane. They don't understand geopolitical truths and cultural truths. They don't understand. They physically don't understand what's going on. They don't have a clue. They're clueless. They're like AOC. It's clueless. Trump understands that Putin is not our enemy. So, all this hysteria about Trump is Russia's Manchurian candidate and he's allying with the Russians, he's just being smart. That's all. And when you see all these moron adults screaming about how we're taking over with Russia, and they have a bumper sticker with like a Russian flag and we lost the Cold War, they have no idea how dumb they are. They are the communists now. The people who are screaming Russia's taking us over, we do better if Russia took us over. If America could supplant all our Democrats and put them somewhere else and take all those people, all Russians, and put them in America, America would thrive. America would be like the land of the free. And they would never, ever vote Democrat. The Russians would never vote Democrat because they know how sick and failed and evil is communism and leftist thought. See what I'm saying? See now? What I have just told you, no leftist understands. That's why someone like me is so arrogant and so disgusted, because these people scream at me as if I don't know what I'm talking about, as if I'm immoral and ignorant and stupid. And they are clearly the stupid ones, as I have just evidenced. They have no idea what I've told you. Fucking zero. And they're just clamoring for their own downfall. They're clamoring for a communist state. You know, in New York, you can be fined if you don't say Z or here when you talk about a transvestite sexuality. That's totalitarianism. You know how they're taking my videos down if I just speak politically? Think about that. That's scary. Do you see how the German chancellor, I forget what her name is instituting laws that you can't have freedom of speech?
Werden und müssen wir uns stellen in diesem Hause. Und das werden wir auch hinbekommen, meine Damen und Herren. Denn sonst ist diese Gesellschaft nicht mehr das, was sie glauben.
Do you see how artificial everything is? Do you see how all this racism? Racism is an organic element of communism.
My country brings to India not freedom, progress, and friendship between the nations, but racism, exploitation, and slavery. And of course, economical inefficiency to this country.
No matter what, it's black against white, yellows against green, doesn't matter where the division line goes. As long as this group come into antagonistic clash, sometimes militantly, sometimes with firearms.
We're all supposed to live as one, and you can't express your identity as a racial member because that is not part of utopia. That's part of nature. They want to destroy everything America was founded on, and they want to destroy our white majority because they're just sick and they think that's a bad thing to allow a race self-determination to preserve its ethnic dominant makeup. And by the way, the term white supremacy is so sinister. They've conflated Hitler's sick genocidal ideology of we're going to destroy Jews and we're going to conquer. They've taken that and said, okay, that's Hitler, so that means that no one is allowed to have ethnic affinity, even though, of course, everyone in Africa is allowed to have it, and everyone in South America is allowed to have it, and all the Eskimos are allowed to have it, and all the Japanese are allowed to have it, but Europeans, because we build such beautiful civilizations, because it's somehow in our DNA that we're so fastidious, and we have such a wellspring of energy. As an example, as I do by making these videos, I have all this creative energy. I can feel it. That DNA is what makes our cultures so prosperous. Not that African culture is bad, it's beautiful. African culture is absolutely beautiful, but the DNA is different. They make a simple living by the land and not worrying about things and just be zen. There's nothing wrong with that, but the complete, stupid, wildly emotional left A, doesn't appreciate that, and B, in their very limited morality, they think that, oh, these 6 white people are making this one black person feel uncomfortable, and that's a bad situation. They stop. They just stop thinking at that point. They stop and they say, okay, I believe that. It makes sense to me. And they stop thinking, and then they want to destroy the entire biological altruism instinct in the white people and destroy our race and our culture because they stop thinking at that one point. And they scream and scream and scream. Meanwhile, all of us, and even them deep down, know something's wrong. But they don't want to admit that something might be wrong because they can't figure it out for themselves, and they're so scared to be called racist. So everyone's just scared. The left is just sick. They're A to Z sick. It's a ball of yarn that's so hopelessly sick. Okay, here's my following clips. Notice how sick and sinister they are. And by the way, I forgot to say this. Whenever someone says, oh, look how badly Trump has treated our European allies. No, he hasn't. He's simply saying they have to pay their share of NATO bills as they contractually are supposed to, 2% of their GDP. And he's saying we're not going to be ripped off as if we're some kind of fat sugar daddy. We just get to give free money. It's not free. It's coming out of your pocket. Your pocket, your hard work. While they get to vacation so much a year and they have their 6-hour-a-day work, we're struggling here. And then they expect us to pay for them. Is that fair? The left understands nothing of what I said. Nothing. All they do is scream. Racist, bigot, Nazi, stupid, heartless, monster, evil, devil. Why would I make these videos if I was any of those things? And lastly, this is like the easiest. You people on the left know that Donald Trump had nothing at all to do with this collusion narrative, this Russian collusion narrative. You guys know that, right? So the only question really, well, my latest question is, when is this stuff going to fade away? Well, I mean, when are these morons going to stop buying the New York Times newspaper and reading Donald Trump, the collusion evidence has come out? There has been zero evidence because there's no collusion. I mean, it's so stupid. It's so stupid. It's just so dumb.
The European Union is a Soviet model. Some compare the EU to the USSR, and there are good reasons for this. This has given rise to the name the EU SSR. As usual, people on the far left like to pretend that this comparison is based on conspiracy theories, as they push their agenda ever closer, never looking back, and always character assassinating anyone that opposes them. Even as the EU increasingly becomes a Soviet-style dictatorship, leftists will suppress the facts by lying and denying that their agenda is to Sovietize Europe under the guise of federalization. With this video, I aim to expose these Europhiles for what they are, either useful idiots or willing ideologues attempting to gradually implement a Soviet bloc. After 2 world wars in the 20th century, a European dictatorship had failed through direct conflict. As a result, totalitarians moved towards a gradualist agenda to subtly transfer power from nations to international governing bodies. As is common with globalism, treaties are used to subtly break down national sovereignty. The European Union was one such insidious ploy, beginning after World War II with the Coal and Steel Treaty of 1951. It was signed by only a handful of nations: Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, merging access to steel and coal under a common plan, with the stated goal of preventing member states from making weapons of war independently. Europe had fought 2 world wars to avoid losing national identity and independence, but with the stroke of a pen, the gradual process of EU totalitarianism had begun. By 1957, even greater loss of sovereignty occurred with the Treaty of Rome. Under the guise of a common market, nations agreed to ever closer union, essentially meaning that all signatories would gradually transfer governance to a European superstate. In the 60s, the EU expanded to include a common agricultural policy. This included price fixing that undermined free market principles, and EU-dictated environmental policies in the name of animal rights and sustainability. Already we can see that the EU was becoming far less of a common market and much more of an ever closer union, i.e. an unelected dictatorship. In the same decade, it began collectively donating foreign aid to Africa, one of the few economic benefits to EU membership being the removal of customs duties in 1968. By the 70s, movement towards the euro currency had begun, with narrow fluctuating limits for the currencies of EU member states. In the same decade, pollution fines were introduced under the mantle of environmentalism, groups like Greenpeace being founded to condition the public into accepting yet more centralisation. In 1973, 3 new member states joined the European bloc: Ireland, Denmark, and the United Kingdom, and by the end of the decade, European parliamentary elections had been established, as well as policies that redistributed revenue around the European Union with the alleged intention of transferring money from the rich to the poor. Greece, Spain, and Portugal joined the EU in the 1980s, bringing the membership up to 12. In the same decade, the EU began funding research and development programs and launched the Single European Act that transferred power over regulation to the EU, as well as even more environmental control. By now, the original Treaty of Rome has been continuously revised, without the consent of the governed, allowing Europhiles to operate unopposed by the masses. The first steps towards European open borders were taken with the Erasmus programme, allowing students in the EU to study in another EU country. In the 90s, the goal of an open border, single currency European Union was realised, with Austria, Finland, and Sweden joining the bloc. Over 200 EU laws had been passed since 1986, negating national sovereignty. In the few instances where referendums had been held, EU control had been taken far further than initially proposed, either by EU laws that bypassed national powers or by gradually transferring power to the EU without the knowledge or consent of the people. What's more, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, post-communist nations gradually became members, integrating a population already conditioned to mass poverty and dictatorship. As the world moved into a new millennium, the EU would accelerate even faster towards a superstate, with 27 members and 3 more being considered. The Treaty of Lisbon in 2007 amended all previous treaties, as has been the trend with treaties, laws, and acts that came before it. Climate change, global terrorism, and other ostensible issues have been used to further strengthen EU governance, and due to decades of transference of power through unelected bureaucracy, the EU is now almost identical to the Soviet Union. To understand why, we can juxtapose the EU alongside the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union operated an unelected dictatorship called the nomenklatura. While those on the inside of this group would decide its membership and structure, no one else had a say. The highest authority of the nomenklatura was the Politburo. The European Commission is basically identical to the Politburo, totally unaccountable and unelected, though having 25 members rather than 12 to 13. The Soviet Union operated a central committee, acting as a policy forum for the Politburo, but having no control over decision-making. The EU's version of the Central Committee is the European Parliament. Unlike the Soviet Central Committee, the EU Parliament votes on policies, but like the Central Committee, has no say over any amendments or creation of policy. European Parliament is elected via proportional representation, which is not democratic representation by majority. All the European Commission has to do to get around any political opposition in Parliament is continuously reintroduce policies until eventually they're voted in, much like the way that countries holding referendums are continuously forced to vote over and over again until they vote the way that the European Commission expects. This happened in Ireland, for example, when they voted in a referendum twice in just 18 months for Lisbon Treaty ratification. The EU is increasingly leading to the rise of Euroscepticism across the European Union, and this is very apparent when we look at the results of the 2014 European elections. The growing popularity of UKIP in the UK has forced UK Prime Minister David Cameron to appear tough on ever closer union with the EU and in favour of reform. Alas, his stance has only proven how any involvement with the EU will only move in one direction: Sovietization presented as American-style federalism. Cameron's attempt to block the appointment of so-called EU federalist Jean-Claude Juncker as head of the European Commission shows that the majority involved in the EU are in favour of ever closer union. Any attempt to reform the EU by moving away from federalism, as Cameron prefers, is futile. Many have tried and failed to avert the unstoppable push towards EU Sovietization. Hence the reason UKIP is becoming ever more popular in the UK. For those believing that any similarity between the EU and Soviet Union is purely coincidental, think again. Former Soviet dissident Vladimir Bukovsky published Soviet Politburo and Central Committee documents proving that the plan was to turn the European Common Market into a Soviet model and temporarily make Russia more socially democratic. The two would then converge seamlessly due to their similar structure, resulting in what the Soviet Union could never achieve: the Sovietization of Western Europe. Not only was previous European Commissioner President José Manuel Barroso linked to violent Maoist communists in his youth, but his replacement, Jean-Claude Juncker, was linked to Trotskyite far-left ideology in his earlier years. If this video still isn't enough to make people realise that the EU is modelled on the Soviet Union, even EU posters have unashamedly put the communist hammer and sickle alongside religions of the world as they all form a communist star. This is Rocking Mystery, over and out.